I stood in the nursery, a place that just days ago had been filled with hope and laughter. The pale blue walls, once decorated with little stars and moons, now showed ugly scars where I had ripped the decals off. The crib I had proudly assembled piece by piece was dismantled and shoved into the corner. All the tiny clothes, the superhero blankets, the stuffed animals I'd thrown them into trash bags and dragged them to the hallway. As if erasing the dream would erase the pain, my hands were still trembling. My chest rose and fell in sharp, uneven breaths. This wasn't just a room. It had been my promise to the child I thought I was having, the son I had already named, already imagined teaching to throw a baseball, already pictured running beside me at the park, but now it felt like a tomb. Behind me, in the doorway, my wife stood frozen. Her eyes were red, her face pale. She didn't step in, didn't speak. She just looked at me, and I knew she was searching for the man she had married, the one who used to laugh with her while painting these walls. Instead, she was staring at a stranger, and for the first time in years, I felt completely lost. A few months earlier, everything had felt so different. When she first told me she was pregnant, it was like lightning running through my veins. Joy, fear, hope, all of it at once. I'd grown up with a father who was there in body but absent in every way that mattered. For years I swore that if I ever had a child, I would be the opposite. I would show up. I would be present. I would be the kind of dad I always wished I had. So when my wife said, "The doctor says it's a boy," I almost cried right there. A boy, the word echoed in my mind like music. I called my closest friends. I started reading every book I could find about raising boys. I built entire futures in my head, camping trips, late night talks, teaching him how to shave, how to drive, how to be strong but kind. And then the nursery happened. We painted the walls light blue because that was always my favorite color as a kid. I remembered begging my father once for a blue t-shirt when I was about 10. He brushed me off, uninterested. That memory stuck with me like a splinter. So when I rolled that first coat of paint onto the wall, it felt like healing an old wound. This would be my son's world, a place where he'd never feel unseen. We bought the sturdiest oak crib I could find. I decided to name him Ethan, after my grandfather, quiet man, but steady as a rock, the only real anchor I ever had. I imagined 3 generations connected by one name, one legacy. It felt like everything I'd ever longed for was finally coming true. But life doesn't always care about the stories you write in your head. One night over dinner, while I was talking excitedly about taking Ethan to his first ball game, my wife's adoptive mother chuckled and said, "More likely, she'll want bedtime stories than baseball games." Double quotes. The room went silent. I froze. My wife's spoon rattled in her hand. Her mum's face drained of color, realizing what she had just let slip. I looked straight at my wife. "You knew." Her lips quivered. Tears welled up before she could even answer. And then, in the softest whisper, came the words that shattered me. "I'm sorry. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want to see you disappointed. I thought if you could believe just for a little while that it was a boy, maybe it would make you happy." In that instant, it wasn't just the dream of a son that died. It was my trust. The person I counted on most in this world had decided to hide the truth from me. I sat through the rest of dinner in silence, but inside I was breaking apart. And later that night, I stormed into the nursery and tore it all down. Every trace of Ethan, every trace of the dream, Now, standing in that gutted room, I couldn't decide who I was angrier at, her mother, or myself for being so naive. The nursery was gone. The future I had painted over those blue walls had vanished, and all that was left was an emptiness I didn't know how to fill. And in that emptiness, I wondered if I had just lost more than a dream. I wondered if I was losing myself. That was only the beginning. If there's one thing I learned early in life, it's this: not every child grows up in the warmth of a father's love as a boy. I used to sit on the front porch, watching the neighborhood kids play catch with their dads. I'd see fathers laughing, scooping their kids up when they stumbled, or clapping them on the back after a missed swing with a simple, "Don't worry, you'll get it next time." That sound, their laughter, still echoes in my memory like a melody from a world I never belonged to. My father was different. He was there, but never really there. A shadow sitting in front of the TV, cigarette in hand, eyes glazed over. He didn't ask about school. He never cared about what I was drawing in my sketchbook. He never once got down on the floor to play with me. I'll never forget the day I ran home with my very first award, second place in an art contest. My heart was bursting with pride. I held it out to him, desperate for some recognition. He barely looked at it, just muttered, "Focus on math. Art won't put food on the table." That moment carved a hollow space inside me. My mother tried to fill the void. She worked 2 jobs, kept food on the table, and reminded me, "Don't be too hard on your father. He has his own struggles." But how could an 8-year-old understand the private battles of a grown man? All I knew was that, night after night, I lay in bed wishing for a father who saw me, who wanted me. Summers were the hardest. The other kids went fishing with their dads while I sat alone on the porch, rolling marbles in my palm. Sometimes I imagined what it would be like if my dad took me to the lake. How proud I'd make him by sitting still, waiting for the fish to bite once. I got up the courage to ask him, "Dad, can we go play soccer this weekend?" He didn't even look up. "I'm busy. Go play by yourself." That short reply cut deeper than any insult. I remember walking back to my room, swallowing tears, convincing myself maybe I just wasn't good enough to deserve his time. That's when the belief took root. To be loved, I had to be perfect. So I pushed myself. I studied harder, tried to be the best kid I could be. But no matter what I did, the distance between us only grew. Our house wasn't filled with shouting. It was worse. It was filled with silence, so heavy it smothered me. The only person who ever made me feel safe was my grandfather. He had this calm way about him. He taught me how to write my name, his large hands guiding my small ones across the paper. On summer afternoons, he'd take me to the park and tell stories about his youth while we sat beneath the oak trees. With him, I didn't have to prove myself. I was enough, just as I was. That's why, years later, when I learned my wife was pregnant, I wanted to name my son Ethan after my grandfather. It felt like a way to carry his strength, his love, into the next generation. But the truth is, the deeper that longing grew, the more fear it carried. I was terrified of repeating history. Terrified my child would look at me with the same cold, disappointed eyes I once gave my father. Somewhere along the way, I convinced myself that only a son could heal those wounds. Only a son could help me rewrite the story. A daughter. I told myself she'd never be able to fill that void. Looking back, that belief was unfair and fair to my wife, unfair to the baby. But at the time, it was the shield I built around my scarred heart. One of the hardest memories came when I was 13. My school held a Father's Day event, games, a tug-of-war, picnic lunches. I sat alone on a bench, watching the other kids laughing with their dads. At one point, a friend's father tried to include me, saying, "Hey, join us, I'll play with both of you." I smiled politely, but inside it stung. I didn't want a borrowed dad. I wanted my own. That night, I asked my father why he didn't come. His answer was one word: busy. That single word crushed the last bit of hope I had left. So when I got married, I carried that hunger into my new life. Having a son wasn't just about raising a child. It was about proving to myself I could be the father mine never was. It was about breaking the cycle. That's why, when I found out it was actually a girl, it wasn't just a surprise. It was like my whole world collided with the ghosts of my past. And in that collision, I came apart. Now, with some distance, I can see it more clearly. It wasn't the baby girl in my wife's belly that broke me. It was the little boy inside Amitha, one who still longed for a father he never had. The one whose wounds never healed, finally crying out and facing those shadows, was just the beginning. After the storm of emotions hit me, I clung desperately to anything that made me feel like I still had control. The pale blue nursery had been my dream, my sanctuary, my promise to a child I thought I was having. Now, with all of it dismantled, it felt like everything in my life was slipping through my fingers. But in my mind, I could still hold on, still create the world I had imagined. For days, I lived in two parallel worlds. One was the harsh, cold reality. My heartbroken wife, the betrayal, the nursery now empty and silent, the fact that everything I had built in my head could never exist. The other was the imagined world of Ethan, the son I had already named, already pictured in every detail: the crib, the tiny clothes, the soft blankets, bedtime stories read under the glow of a nightlight, Saturday mornings at the park, cheering at Little League games, teaching him to throw a baseball, teaching him how to pick himself up when he failed. Every time I looked at my wife, her quiet, aching face, I felt a pang of guilt and longing. I wanted to scream at her, "Don't worry. Everything will be okay. He'll be fine." But she couldn't see my imaginary world. All she could see was a man drowning in his own obsession. A man who had pinned every ounce of hope, every unresolved pain, and every unhealed scar from his childhood onto a child that didn't yet exist. I began spending hours online, obsessively building lists, endless lists of toys, books, clothes, furniture, baby gear. I imagined walking down aisles, picking the perfect stroller, the softest onesie, the book that would ignite a love for stories. I told myself that if I could prepare for him, I could make up for all the things I never had: the hugs, the presents, the simple reassurance of a father's attention. He wouldn't know silence like I did. He wouldn't know the sting of absence, the cold weight of being invisible. But the more I tried to control, the more I realized how powerless I truly was. My wife, bearing her own heartbreak, watched me with a mix of pity and worry. Every word she spoke felt like it could shatter my fragile fantasy. I realized then that it wasn't just the truth about the baby's gender that was crushing me, was all the buried pain from my own childhood, pouring into the child I had imagined, the son who would heal me. I started to withdraw from everyone. Even my wife's adoptive mother, who had been so warm and supportive, became a figure of suspicion in my eyes. Every time she mentioned "if it's a girl," My blood would boil, my heart racing, my hands going cold. I was trapped in a storm of fear and rage, and I had no outlet at night. I would sit on the edge of the bed, staring at the empty, stripped-down walls of the nursery, imagining Ethan lying in the crib, his eyes wide and trusting, looking up at me. I asked myself over and over, if he were real, if he were a boy, could I be the father I'd always dreamed of becoming? Could I keep the promises I whispered to myself as a child to never abandon, to never withhold love, to never repeat the mistakes of my father? The inner conflict was relentless. I wanted a son more than anything, but I feared that my obsession, my desperate need to rewrite my past, would turn me into the kind of father I had always despised. I realized that my illusion of control over the future, over my wife, over myself was slowly suffocating me. I remembered my own childhood, the cold silence of a father who was always present in body but absent in heart, the endless lessons I had learned to survive alone. Now, on the brink of fatherhood, I was desperate not to repeat that cycle. But paradoxically, in trying to avoid repeating the mistakes of my father, I was becoming him so consumed by control and obsession that I couldn't see what really mattered. Presence, patience, love. My wife, quietly, continued to care for me. She cooked, she cleaned, she tried to hold our fragile life together. She spoke little, her words measured, her eyes patient. And yet, I was lost in my imagined world, seeing her more as a stranger than a partner, caught up in my own internal chaos. One night, I sat on the bed with a notebook, writing out every detail of Ethan's life as I imagined it, the toys, the bedtime stories, the walks in the park, the games, the lessons in resilience. I wrote until my hand cramped, until sweat poured down my forehead, until my heart pounded so hard it felt like it might burst. I wrote as if putting it on paper could make it real, as if I could trap the dream in ink and hold on to it forever. And then I stopped. I looked around the empty room, and the reality hit me harder than ever. None of it mattered. None of the lists, none of the imagined milestones, none of the fantasies could change the truth. I wasn't going to have Ethan. I was going to have a daughter reality I wasn't ready to face. A reality that shattered the very foundation of the dream I had built for so long. I closed my eyes and let the tears fall. I cried for the dream I had lost. I cried for the boy who had never existed. I cried for myself, 8-year-old on the porch, watching the neighborhood kids play with their fathers, unable to understand why he wasn't enough. And in that moment, I realized something crucial. I could no longer live in the fantasy. I had to face the past, confront my own wounds, and somehow open my heart to the daughter I was about to meet. But the question lingered, heavy and terrifying. How do you start? When your own heart is still tangled in anger, grief, and fear. It was then that I understood, painfully and fully, the control I thought I had over everything, over everyone, even over the future, was nothing but an illusion. The only thing anyone can control is themselves. And for the first time, I had to confront the hardest truth of all. If I wanted to be a father at all, I had to start by learning to control my own heart, my own fears, and my own expectations. Only then could I step into the life that was waiting for me, messy, unpredictable, and real. After the storm of emotions hit me, I clung desperately to anything that made me feel like I still had control. The pale blue nursery had been my dream, my sanctuary, my promise to a child I thought I was having. Now, with all of it dismantled, it felt like everything in my life was slipping through my fingers. But in my mind, I could still hold on, still create the world I had imagined. For days, I lived in two parallel worlds. One was the harsh, cold reality. My heartbroken wife, the betrayal, the nursery now empty and silent, the fact that everything I had built in my head could never exist. The other was the imagined world of Ethan, the son I had already named, already pictured in every detail: the crib, the tiny clothes, the soft blankets, bedtime stories read under the glow of a nightlight, Saturday mornings at the park, cheering at Little League games, teaching him to throw a baseball, teaching him how to pick himself up when he failed. Every time I looked at my wife, her quiet, aching face, I felt a pang of guilt and longing. I wanted to scream at her, "Don't worry. Everything will be okay. He'll be fine." But she couldn't see my imaginary world. All she could see was a man drowning in his own obsession. A man who had pinned every ounce of hope, every unresolved pain, and every unhealed scar from his childhood onto a child that didn't yet exist. I began spending hours online, obsessively building lists, endless lists of toys, books, clothes, furniture, baby gear. I imagined walking down aisles, picking the perfect stroller, the softest onesie, the book that would ignite a love for stories. I told myself that if I could prepare for him, I could make up for all the things I never had: the hugs, the presents, the simple reassurance of a father's attention. He wouldn't know silence like I did. He wouldn't know the sting of absence, the cold weight of being invisible. But the more I tried to control, the more I realized how powerless I truly was. My wife, bearing her own heartbreak, watched me with a mix of pity and worry. Every word she spoke felt like it could shatter my fragile fantasy. I realized then that it wasn't just the truth about the baby's gender that was crushing me, was all the buried pain from my own childhood, pouring into the child I had imagined, the son who would heal me. I started to withdraw from everyone. Even my wife's adoptive mother, who had been so warm and supportive, became a figure of suspicion in my eyes. Every time she mentioned "if it's a girl," my blood would boil, my heart racing, my hands going cold. I was trapped in a storm of fear and rage, and I had no outlet at night. I would sit on the edge of the bed, staring at the empty, stripped-down walls of the nursery, imagining Ethan lying in the crib, his eyes wide and trusting, looking up at me. I asked myself over and over, if he were real, if he were a boy, could I be the father I'd always dreamed of becoming? Could I keep the promises I whispered to myself as a child to never abandon, to never withhold love, to never repeat the mistakes of my father? The inner conflict was relentless. I wanted a son more than anything, but I feared that my obsession, my desperate need to rewrite my past, would turn me into the kind of father I had always despised. I realized that my illusion of control over the future, over my wife, over myself was slowly suffocating me. I remembered my own childhood, the cold silence of a father who was always present in body but absent in heart, the endless lessons I had learned to survive alone. Now, on the brink of fatherhood, I was desperate not to repeat that cycle. But paradoxically, in trying to avoid repeating the mistakes of my father, I was becoming him so consumed by control and obsession that I couldn't see what really mattered. Presence, patience, love. My wife, quietly, continued to care for me. She cooked, she cleaned, she tried to hold our fragile life together. She spoke little, her words measured, her eyes patient. And yet, I was lost in my imagined world, seeing her more as a stranger than a partner, caught up in my own internal chaos. One night, I sat on the bed with a notebook, writing out every detail of Ethan's life as I imagined it, the toys, the bedtime stories, the walks in the park, the games, the lessons in resilience. I wrote until my hand cramped, until sweat poured down my forehead, until my heart pounded so hard it felt like it might burst. I wrote as if putting it on paper could make it real, as if I could trap the dream in ink and hold on to it forever. And then I stopped. I looked around the empty room, and the reality hit me harder than ever. None of it mattered. None of the lists, none of the imagined milestones, none of the fantasies could change the truth. I wasn't going to have Ethan. I was going to have a daughter reality I wasn't ready to face. A reality that shattered the very foundation of the dream I had built for so long. I closed my eyes and let the tears fall. I cried for the dream I had lost. I cried for the boy who had never existed. I cried for myself, a tear-old on the porch, watching the neighborhood kids play with their fathers, unable to understand why he wasn't enough. And in that moment, I realized something crucial. I could no longer live in the fantasy. I had to face the past, confront my own wounds, and somehow open my heart to the daughter I was about to meet. But the question lingered, heavy and terrifying. How do you start? When your own heart is still tangled in anger, grief, and fear. It was then that I understood, painfully and fully, the control I thought I had over everything, over everyone, even over the future, was nothing but an illusion. The only thing anyone can control is themselves. And for the first time, I had to confront the hardest truth of all. If I wanted to be a father at all, I had to start by learning to control my own heart, my own fears, and my own expectations. Only then could I step into the life that was waiting for me, messy, unpredictable, and real. The following weeks crept by slowly, each day an internal battle I couldn't escape. I loved my daughter, of that I was certain, but the lingering grief for the son I had imagined clung to me like a shadow I couldn't shake. Every time I entered the nursery, seeing the soft pink clothes, the tiny white crib, my chest tightened. I asked myself again and again, am I loving her the way she needs? Or am I trying to force my lost dream onto a child who hasn't even arrived yet? My wife noticed the tension in my eyes. She would sit beside me, hand resting gently on her belly, feeling the subtle kicks and movements. "Do you want to help me pick out clothes today?" she asked. I nodded, forcing a smile, though guilt lingered like a fog in my chest. I told myself I had to try. I had to learn to love her without the baggage of my own expectations. We went shopping together. The stores were colorful, noisy, filled with tiny clothes, toys, and baby gadgets. Excitement mixed with a strange melancholy as I walked the aisles. I found myself gravitating toward neutral-colored items. Nothing too girly, nothing too boyish as if I was trying to reclaim a piece of the dream I had lost. My wife glanced at me with that same patient, loving look, half amused, half understanding, but I knew she saw the conflict raging inside me. Back home, I began setting up the nursery. The crib, the wardrobe, the tiny hooks for clothes, all arranged with meticulous care. Yet in my mind, Ethan still existed, running around, laughing, hugging me tightly. I would whisper to myself, I will love my child, but why do I still feel this emptiness? The mix of joy and grief was exhausting, yet I pressed on. I had to prepare, I had to be present, I had to love in the real world. My wife's family began getting involved, too. Her adoptive mother called, asking if we needed help with shopping or preparations. I kept my distance, still haunted by past betrayals. Each call felt like a test, controlling my anger, suppressing old resentment, while trying to maintain the appearance of a calm, responsible husband. It was exhausting, like acting a role I had been playing for far too long. The role of a perfect father I wasn't yet ready to be. One evening, when the house was quiet, I sat in the nursery and opened a notebook. I started writing bedtime stories, lessons about patience, playful games we would enjoy together. This time, it wasn't about Ethan. It was about my tiny daughter, her soft hair brushing her cheeks, her wide, curious eyes. Writing these words, I felt my heart slowly start to open, learning how to accept and nurture without the chains of my old fantasies. But doubts didn't disappear. I worried whether I could truly be the father she needed, whether I could love her fully while still carrying the remnants of grief for a son I would never have. That night, my wife came in and sat beside me, placing a hand gently on my shoulder. "Are you okay?" she asked again. This time, I exhaled, dropping the pretense. "I'm trying, but sometimes I still miss the old dream." She said nothing, just squeezed my hand, and in that simple gesture, I felt patience, understanding, and the first hint of hope. I realized I wasn't fighting this battle alone anymore. With her by my side, I could begin to accept that loving our daughter was also a path toward healing. In the days that followed, I learned to separate desire from reality. I watched every movement of my wife and our unborn child, listening for tiny kicks, imagining her laughter and noticing every detail. Each moment became a bridge connecting me to the present, pulling me out of the shadow of my old dream. One night, bathed in the warm glow of the nursery lamp, a strange sense of peace washed over me. I realized that loving a child isn't about fulfilling a fantasy or controlling outcomes. It's about showing up, being patient, and embracing reality. My daughter was coming into the world, and I no longer needed to fear or mourn. I could learn to love her as she was meant to be loved. And that was the first lesson the nursery taught me, to truly love. Sometimes you must let go of the dream you've lost, release control, and open your heart to what is actually in front of you. Only then could I be fully present and start building a genuine, lasting bond with my child and my family. The weeks leading up to my daughter's arrival felt like walking along a tightrope stretched over a chasm of emotions I had never experienced before. Every step forward seemed precarious, every moment loaded with anticipation and fear. I loved my daughter with a depth I couldn't have imagined, yet grief and longing for the son I had once pictured haunted me relentlessly. The nursery now, a mixture of soft pinks, gentle creams, and neutral tones, stood as a quiet reminder of the reality I had to embrace. Even as Ethan's imagined face lingered stubbornly in my mind, each morning I awoke with a tension I couldn't shake. I would wander into the nursery, run my hand over the tiny crib, straighten a blanket, and catch myself imagining Ethan running through the room, laughing, arms outstretched. Can I love her fully and still mourn the boy I never had? I would ask silently. It was a question that pressed on my chest like a weight I couldn't lift. My wife became the anchor, keeping me from falling completely into despair. She moved beside me through every store, every baby aisle, selecting necessities with care and patience. Her smiles, quiet and steady, were lifelines. Yet guilt gnawed at me. I wanted her to know that I loved our daughter, but I also wanted her to understand the inner storm raging inside me. She didn't need explanations. She only needed my presence, but I felt compelled to articulate my struggle, even if it meant admitting to vulnerability. I wasn't used to showing. Even our simplest outings became arenas of internal conflict. The bright, colorful baby stores, filled with chatter, laughter, and the smell of new toys, would ignite both joy and sorrow. I found myself gravitating toward neutral items, nothing to pink, nothing to blue, trying perhaps to reconcile the dream I had lost with the reality I now faced. My wife would glance at me, a look of gentle understanding in her eyes, recognizing the battle I was waging without words. Back home, the nursery became my battleground and my sanctuary. I arranged the crib, hung tiny clothes on hooks, placed soft blankets carefully in drawers, all with meticulous attention. Yet even as I placed each item, Ethan's image would intrude, his wide-eyed smile, the way he would cling to me, the imagined scent of baby powder and boyish mischief. I whispered to myself, I will love my daughter. But why does a hollow ache linger? The conflict between joy and grief was exhausting, but I pressed on. I had to be present. I had to prepare. I had to love here in the real world. Visits and calls from my wife's family introduced another layer of tension. Her adoptive mother, once a figure associated with betrayal, now approached with softness and patience. Every interaction still carried a faint sting of the past. I had to restrain suspicion, temper lingering resentment, and maintain composure. Each conversation was a test of my capacity to focus on the present, rather than get lost in memories of hurt. Nights became a different kind of trial. I would sit in the nursery, notebook in hand, writing bedtime stories, lessons about patience and resilience, imagining playful games we could have together. Each sentence was an attempt to bridge the gap between what I had lost and what was real. This time, the stories were for my daughter, her tiny features painted in my mind, her delicate hair, her curious eyes. Writing, I felt my heart start to open, learning slowly how to nurture and accept without clinging to old fantasies. Doubt, however, never fully dissipated. I wondered if I could truly be the father she needed, if I could love her fully while shadows of longing for Ethan still lingered. I worried that my attachment to a dream might cloud my love for reality. Yet in those quiet moments of reflection, I realized that facing these doubts was part of the journey, part of becoming the father I wanted to be. One night, my wife came in and sat beside me, hand resting gently on my shoulder. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. This time, I let down my defenses and spoke honestly. "I'm trying, but sometimes I still grieve the dream I had," I admitted. She didn't offer solutions or words of comfort, just a quiet squeeze of my hand, and in that small gesture, I felt the first glimmer of hope. For the first time, I wasn't alone in this struggle. With her support, I could begin to accept that loving our daughter fully was also a path to healing. Myself, the following days were exercises in mindfulness and presence. I learned to observe my wife and the movements of our unborn child with attention, to feel each kick, each stretch, as a reminder that life was not a fantasy, it was here, tangible and waiting for me. I imagined her laughter the first time she would take my hand, her tentative steps exploring the world. Each detail grounded me, tethering me to the reality that demanded my full presence. One evening, the nursery bathed in the warm glow of a soft lamp. I felt a strange, gentle lightness in my chest. I realized that loving a child wasn't about perfection, control, or fulfillment of dreams. It was about showing up, being patient, and embracing imperfection. My daughter's arrival would be a reality, not a rehearsal, and I no longer needed to fear it. I could love her as she needed to be loved, and there, standing amid the tiny clothes, the carefully folded blankets, the soft pastel walls, I understood something vital. True love requires courage. Courage to confront your own past, your fears, and your longings. Courage to step into a role you've never fully occupied and do so with authenticity. Only then could I truly be present, truly love, and truly prepare for the journey of fatherhood that awaited me for the first time. I felt ready, not perfect, not completely free from doubt, but present, attentive, and willing. The lessons of the past weeks had crystallized into one enduring truth: to love fully. Sometimes you must relinquish control, release the weight of your expectations, and open your heart to the reality in front of you. Only then could I embrace the future with hope, presence, and the promise of a love unconditioned. The nights leading up to my daughter's birth felt like standing on the edge of a vast, unknown world. Every small task, every preparation, every glance at the nursery seemed to carry a weight I hadn't anticipated. I loved her deeply, but fear, anxiety, and a lingering ache for the son I had imagined crept in like shadows. The nursery, a blend of soft pinks, creams, and gentle neutrals, stood ready, yet in my mind, Ethan's imagined face stubbornly appeared alongside it. Each morning began with a strange mix of anticipation and dread. I would step into the nursery, my hand brushing the tiny crib or smoothing a blanket, and immediately see Ethan running through the room, laughing, arms outstretched. Can I truly love her and let go of what I lost? I would ask myself, the question pressing against my chest like a physical weight. It was exhausting, yet unavoidable. My wife was my anchor. Her steady presence, her quiet patience, made the days bearable. She guided me through stores filled with tiny clothes, rattles, and baby gear. The bright colors, soft fabrics, and cheerful chatter of other parents brought both joy and a pang of sorrow. I found myself reaching for neutral items, not to pink, not to blue as if clinging to fragments of the dream I'd lost. She would look at me with a gentle understanding, a mixture of love and empathy, acknowledging the inner battle I couldn't put into words. At home, the nursery became both a sanctuary and a battlefield. I meticulously arranged the crib, hung tiny clothes, folded blankets with care, but each act was tinged with guilt. Ethan's image haunted the corners of my mind. The boy I had never met, but whose absence I still felt. I will love my daughter, but why do I still feel this void? I whispered to myself repeatedly. The mixture of joy and grief was overwhelming, yet I pressed on. I had to prepare. I had to show up. I had to love fully in the reality before me. Visits from my wife's family added another layer of complexity. Her adoptive mother, once a figure associated with deception, approached now with caution and patience. Still, old tensions lingered beneath the surface, reminding me that trust is not rebuilt overnight. I had to consciously suppress suspicion, manage lingering resentment, and stay focused on the present. Every interaction tested my ability to be fully present for my wife and our unborn child. Nights became a mix of reflection, preparation, and quiet anxiety. I would sit in the nursery, notebook in hand, writing bedtime stories and lessons for my daughter. Each line I wrote was an attempt to reconcile my longing for what I had lost with the reality of what awaited. I painted vivid pictures of her tiny hands, her curious eyes, and the laughter I imagined filling the room. Writing allowed me to face my own flaws and fears, and slowly my heart began to open. I realized that nurturing my daughter meant accepting her fully, without the shadows of what might have been. Doubt, however, remained a constant companion. I questioned whether I could truly be the father she needed, whether my lingering grief for a son I would never have would cloud my love. I feared I might inadvertently impose my lost dreams onto her. Yet even amid these doubts, a faint clarity began to emerge. The only way to move forward was to confront these fears, to step into fatherhood fully, and to embrace love in its imperfect form. One quiet evening, my wife sat beside me, hand resting on my shoulder. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. For the first time, I let my guard down. "I'm trying, but I still grieve what I imagined," I admitted. She didn't offer answers, only squeezed my hand, a small gesture that carried immense reassurance. In that moment, I realized I wasn't alone in this struggle. With her by my side, I could start letting go, start loving fully, start embracing the reality of our daughter. The following days were exercises in mindfulness and presence. I learned to notice every subtle movement of my wife and the baby, feeling the gentle kicks as tangible reminders that life was happening now, not in some imagined past. I envisioned her laughter, her first steps, her tiny hands wrapping around mine. These imagined moments anchored me in the present, pulling me out of the shadows of past longing. Even so, the fear of inadequacy lingered. Could I truly rise to the responsibility of being a father? Could I keep my old wounds from interfering with my love? These questions followed me everywhere. I began to understand that fatherhood wasn't about perfection or fulfilling fantasies. It was about showing up, being patient, and embracing the unpredictable reality of life. One night, bathed in the golden glow of the nursery lamp, I felt a strange, almost surreal lightness. I realized that loving a child didn't require perfection, it required courage. Courage to confront your past, your fears, your deepest insecurities. Courage to step into a role you've never fully known and do your best anyway. Only then could I truly be present and truly love. As the morning sunlight streamed through the window, casting warm rays over the tiny clothes and blankets, I felt hope settle in my chest. Everything was ready. I was ready, not flawless, not completely free of doubt, but ready in the ways that mattered. I was prepared to embrace my daughter, to show up, and to love her wholly, and that, I realized, was the most important lesson before her birth. To prepare for a new life, you must confront your fears, accept reality, and open your heart. Only by doing so can you truly be present, truly love, and step into the future with patience, compassion, and hope. My daughter was coming, and for the first time I felt ready, not perfect, but present, loving, and whole enough to meet her in the world she was about to enter. The morning sunlight streamed through the hospital room window, casting long golden rays over the sterile floor. But inside me, the world felt both electric and heavy. Today was the day I would meet my daughter for the first time, and every cell in my body pulsed with anticipation, fear, and an almost unbearable excitement. My stomach knotted as I watched my wife stir beside me, feeling her belly shift gently with our child's movements. I took a deep breath and whispered, almost to myself, this is it. Today, everything changes. The hospital was alive with quiet chaos, the faint antiseptic smell, the hum of fluorescent lights, the beeping of monitors, and the soft murmur of nurses moving from room to room. Every sound heightened my awareness, made my heartbeat pound louder. I grasped my wife's hand tightly, trying to transmit calm through my touch, even as I felt my own anxiety flare. She met my gaze with those eyes I had loved since we met, gentle, reassuring, but still carrying her own undercurrent of worry. In that moment, we were two people stepping into uncharted territory together, bound by fear, hope, and love. Labor began in earnest, and I stayed by her side, every second a mixture of helplessness and determination. I whispered encouragements, held her hand through the sharp contractions, tried to mirror her breathing, and felt an intimate connection form in the struggle. Time seemed to stretch and compress, a strange paradox where minutes felt like hours and yet passed in flashes. Each wave of pain she endured felt like my own, and in it, I discovered a new dimension of empathy and love, precursor to the kind of devotion fatherhood demanded. Hours passed, and the anticipation grew almost unbearable. I found myself speaking softly to her belly, to the child I had yet to meet, trying to bridge the invisible distance with words and touch. "I'm here. I'm ready. We're ready," I murmured, though inside I still battled shadows of fear and lingering grief for the son I had imagined. But each tiny movement from within her womb reminded me of reality, the life that existed now, fully, tangibly, and waiting for me. Then came the moment that forever altered the course of my life, the first cry, a sound so raw, so piercing, yet so full of life that I felt the world pause around me. Nurses quickly cleaned and swaddled her, and then, in what felt like the slowest, most significant moment of my life, she was placed into my arms. The instant I held her, time collapsed. I felt her tiny, delicate fingers curl around mine, felt the rapid thrum of her heart against my chest. My eyes welled up, tears spilling freely down my cheeks. I stared at her, a perfect mix of vulnerability and strength, and realized something fundamental. This was the purest love I had ever known, untainted by expectations, unclouded by past grief. My wife, exhausted but radiant, smiled at us. Her eyes mirrored mine, reflecting the same awe, relief, and overwhelming joy. In that room, the bond between us transcended romance. It became the foundation of a family. For the first time, I fully comprehended the magnitude of what it meant to be a parent. It wasn't just about providing, protecting, or guiding. It was about presence, about learning, about responding with patience and empathy. The hours that followed blurred into a tapestry of small, intimate moments. I learned to cradle her correctly, to support her head, to soothe her with gentle shushes and sways. I marveled at her every breath, her tiny yawn, the curl of her lips when she stirred in sleep. Each act, each touch, strengthened a bond that words could never capture. It dawned on me that love was built in these small moments, not in grand gestures, not in imagined dreams, but in the consistent, unwavering care and attention I could give. Even the simplest tasks became profound lessons. Changing her diaper, swaddling her in a soft blanket, gently rocking her to sleep. Each motion was a dance of precision, patience, and deep attention. I listened to the subtle cues she gave, learning to interpret cries and movements, and with every correct response, my confidence grew. The fears that had haunted me, the doubts about my capability, the echoes of my lost dream for a son began to dissolve in the face of her presence. She needed me, and that necessity was transformative at night. When the room was silent except for the soft rhythm of her breathing, I sat holding her on my chest and reflected on everything I had feared and hoped for. The past, my longing for a son, my regrets, my anxieties, was still there, but it no longer dictated my love. I realized that fatherhood was not about perfection or fulfilling fantasies. It was about showing up, being present, and embracing reality with all its imperfections. My daughter didn't need the father I had imagined. She needed the father I could be here and now. These first days at home were a continuous blend of wonder, exhaustion, and discovery. We rotated shifts with my wife, learning each other's rhythms, discovering how to comfort, feed, and bond with this tiny being who had already reshaped our lives. Every day brought new challenges, small victories, and moments of pure, unfiltered joy. I watched my wife, her patience and love, and felt immense gratitude, not just for her, but for the journey we had taken together, for the family we were building from scratch. Amidst the chaos of late-night feedings and endless diaper changes, a quiet understanding settled over me. Love wasn't a destination. It was a process, a choice made moment by moment. I could not control every outcome, nor could I erase the shadows of my past. But I could be present, attentive, and willing to grow alongside my daughter. The first time she gripped my finger, the first time she recognized my voice, the first peaceful sleep on my chest, they became the markers of a love far deeper than any dream I had ever held. As the sunlight streamed through our home the following morning, reflecting off the tiny furniture and soft blankets, I felt a calm I had not known I was capable of. The anxieties, the longing for a son, the fear of inadequacy of it had softened under the weight of reality and the presence of love. I knew challenges lay ahead, sleepless nights, unforeseen difficulties, but in that moment I was ready to face whatever came next, ready to love without reservation, ready to embrace the chaotic, beautiful, unpredictable journey of fatherhood in the quiet moments. When she slept peacefully against my chest and my wife rested beside us, I whispered, "I am here, and I will always be here. I love you, my daughter. I promise to learn, to grow, and to be present with you, no matter what." It was not a declaration of perfection, but a vow of presence, a commitment to show up every day with patience, love, and an open heart. And in that simple, profound realization, I understood the ultimate truth of parenthood. It is not the fantasies we hold or the plans we make that define us, but the courage to meet life and the children in it exactly as they are. My daughter had arrived, and with her she brought a love so profound, so transformative, that every shadow of doubt or loss in my heart melted away. I was her father, fully, imperfectly, yet entirely, and that was more than enough. The first days with my daughter stretched on like a delicate, intricate dance, one step forward, one step back, each moment both exhausting and awe-inspiring. Every sound, every movement felt magnified in the quiet of our home. The soft whimpers in the night, the tiny hiccups, the flutter of her lashes as she shifted in her sleep, they all seemed to demand my full attention, my complete presence. I learned quickly that parenting was less about grand gestures and more about noticing the smallest signals, responding with patience and care, and being present even when sleep-deprived and overwhelmed. I watched her closely. memorizing the curve of her lips when she stirred, the way her tiny fists clenched and unclenched, the subtle flicker of recognition in her eyes when she heard my voice. Each observation became a lesson, each small response a triumph. When she finally settled against my chest, her soft breath tickling my skin, it felt like the entire world had narrowed to the two of us. In those quiet, vulnerable moments, I realized the truth that no book or guide could ever fully prepare me for. Love is built in the minutiae. It's in the gentle rocking, the whispered reassurances, the patient waiting for her to fall asleep on her own terms. My wife, exhausted but radiant, was a constant reminder that we were in this together. We found a rhythm shifting through feedings, diaper changes, and lullabies, learning each other's cues, laughing quietly at small victories, consoling each other in moments of doubt, watching her care for our daughter with a patience I could only aspire to filled me with admiration. I understood, more than ever, that parenting was a partnership, one that demanded empathy, mutual support, and a willingness to embrace imperfection. Some nights were harder than others. The endless feedings, the crying that seemed to come without reason, the feeling of helplessness when nothing seemed to soothe her tested me in ways I had never imagined. But each time I held her, speaking softly, rocking gently, stroking her tiny back, I felt a shift within myself. My fear of inadequacy began to fade. The longing I had once carried for a son, the regrets and doubts of the past, they all melted in the presence of this tiny, breathing miracle in my arms. She needed me, and that need was transformative. One early morning, I found myself sitting by the window, sunlight spilling across the room, casting a warm glow on her small face as she slept. I thought about the journey that had brought us here, the hopes, the losses, the anxieties, and realized that none of it mattered compared to this present. She wasn't the child I had imagined. She was the child I had now, fully alive, demanding my attention, my love, my presence. And in that realization, I felt an overwhelming sense of purpose. The small routines became profound lessons in love and connection. Changing her diaper became an exercise in attentiveness. Swaddling her taught me patience. And the way I learned to soothe her with soft murmurs and gentle rocking revealed a capacity for empathy I hadn't fully recognized in myself. Every interaction, however mundane it seemed, strengthened a bond that words could never capture. Each time she grasped my finger, cooed softly in response to my voice, or drifted into sleep on my chest, I felt an anchor forming between USA's connection that would endure far beyond these first fragile days. Visitors came and went, offering advice, congratulating us, and sometimes sharing stories that reminded me how universal this experience was. Yet, amid the noise of well-meaning counsel and the occasional chaos of adjusting to life with a newborn, I found my own rhythm, my own understanding of what it meant to be a father. I didn't need perfection. I didn't need to follow a script. I needed to be present, to learn, to respond, and, above all, to love unwaveringly. Even the quiet, unremarkable moments were filled with meaning. Sitting on the couch while she slept on my chest, feeling the rise and fall of her tiny body against mine, I contemplated how much life had changed in just a few days. My priorities had shifted, my perspective widened, and the fears that had shadowed me before seemed trivial compared to the profound responsibility and joy of nurturing. This little life, each day was a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration, a balance of fear and hope. I learned to celebrate the small victories, the first successful feeding without tears, the first calm night, the first smile that felt like recognition. And each time I felt a little more confident, a little more grounded in my role as a father. The past still existed, yes, but it no longer defined my capacity to love. And in those early, fragile days, I discovered a truth that I would carry with me forever. Parenthood isn't about perfection or fulfilling expectations. It's about showing up consistently, with a heart open to learning, to adapting, to loving fully. My daughter didn't need the father I had imagined. She needed the father I could be here and now, imperfect, attentive, and completely devoted. In the quiet moments of those first days, when she slept peacefully against me and my wife rested beside us, I whispered a promise to myself and to her. I am here. I will always be here. I will learn, I will grow, and I will love you every single day. It was not a vow of perfection, but a vow of presence, and in that presence, I felt the first true sense of what it meant to be a parent. The first few weeks at home with our daughter felt like a whirlwind, a mix of chaos, discovery, and small triumphs that left me both utterly exhausted and completely exhilarated. Every day was like a new chapter in a book I hadn't read before, where the plot shifted constantly and I was both character and narrator. Unsure of what would happen next, but completely absorbed in the story. Sleep had become a rare luxury. Nights stretched long into the early hours, filled with cries that demanded immediate attention, and back-to-back feedings that created a rhythm I had never known. Yet amidst the exhaustion, there was a sweetness, a grounding satisfaction that came from being fully present. In every moment, I quickly realized that parenting wasn't about having all the answers. It was about learning to listen. Listening to the subtle signals of a newborn, the quiet cues from my wife when she was tired or frustrated, the ever-changing rhythm of a home revolving around a tiny human. I became attuned to the way our daughter's brows would furrow when she was uncomfortable, the faint curl of her lips when she was content, the barely audible sigh that meant she was ready to sleep. Every observation was a small victory. Every successful response felt like a celebration. We developed a routine, a rhythm, though it was never perfect. Nights were divided into shifts. I learned to anticipate her needs, often before she even vocalized, them a shift from reactive care to proactive attention that made me feel more confident, more capable. My wife and I leaned on each other heavily. There were moments of frustration when exhaustion and emotion collided, but there were also silent moments of understanding, a glance, a hand squeeze, a quiet laugh at the absurdity of our new reality. We were learning not just how to parent, but how to parent as a team. Some days were harder than others. Diaper blowouts, inconsolable cries, moments when nothing seemed to soothe her all, tested patience I didn't know I had. I learned to breathe through frustration, to remind myself that I was still learning, and that my presence alone was enough even if I wasn't perfect. And in those moments, I realized something profound. Resilience was forming in our family. Her cries became cues, not crises. My wife's exhaustion became a shared experience, not a burden I carried alone. And my own fears about failing, about repeating past mistakes, softened under the steady, daily reality of caring for her. Each day was anchored by small rituals. Morning feedings by the window, sunlight spilling across her tiny hands. Bath time, where warm water and gentle touch soothed both baby and parent. Quiet moments on the couch, rocking her to sleep while listening to the gentle rhythm of her breath. These weren't just tasks, they were lessons in love, patience, and presence. Every small moment felt profound. Visitors came and went, family, friends, neighbors, but we quickly learned to protect our rhythm, to prioritize our time together over expectations or advice. Setting boundaries became part of the routine, explaining gently but firmly that we needed quiet, uninterrupted time. In doing so, I discovered another truth about parenting. Being a good parent sometimes means advocating for your family, even when it means saying no or adjusting the world around you. By the second month, a subtle transformation began. I noticed changes in myself, calmer patience, deeper empathy, a quiet confidence that came not from knowing everything, but from showing up consistently. I started trusting my instincts more, feeling the connection that had formed since the day she was born, a quiet assurance that I could meet her needs even when the world was unpredictable. Fatherhood became less about fear of failure and more about embracing growth, learning from mistakes, celebrating small wins, and understanding that love is an action, not just a feeling. Our daughter was growing and changing, and with every milestone lifting her head, cooing for the first time. Rolling slightly on her own, I felt exhilaration unlike anything I had known. Each achievement reminded me of the preciousness of life and the privilege of being part of it. I marveled at her curiosity, resilience, and her ability to command attention with the smallest gestures. And in turn, I discovered resilience in myself, the capacity to remain calm under stress, to act decisively in moments of uncertainty, and to find joy in the smallest successes. I also understood my partnership with my wife more deeply. We shared responsibilities, adjusted to each other's rhythms, and communicated in ways beyond words. A glance, a gentle touch, a shared sigh in the middle of a long night all became expressions of solidarity, love, and mutual respect. Parenting, I realized, wasn't just about the child. It was about how we navigated the world together as a family. Even amid challenges, there were moments of pure joy. Her first unprompted laugh, the first time she turned her head toward my voice, the peaceful moments when everything felt right. Those moments, though small, were sacred. They reminded me that every effort, every sleepless night, every ounce of patience was worth it. And in those moments, I began to see the bigger picture. The life we were building wasn't perfect, but it was ours. I understood more fully than ever that fatherhood isn't about perfection, about fulfilling fantasies or correcting past regrets. It's about showing up every day with attention, love, and presence. My daughter didn't need a perfect father. She needed a father who was there, who listened, who learned, and who loved without reservation. And as I held her, watched her grow, and witnessed our family evolve, I felt an overwhelming gratitude, not just for her, but for the journey we were on together, for the lessons in patience, humility, and resilience we learned every day. When morning light streamed through the windows one quiet day, reflecting off soft blankets and tiny furniture, I realized something profound. This was the life we had built, imperfect and beautiful. Challenges lay ahead, sleepless nights, unexpected illnesses, the trials of life, but I felt ready. Ready not because I was perfect, but because I was present. Ready to learn, grow, love, and face whatever came next as a father, as a husband, and as part of the family we were shaping together. And in that moment, I whispered again to my daughter, just as I had in the earliest days, I am here. I will always be here. I will love you, guide you, and grow with you. No matter what, I am your father, and I will be present in every moment. It wasn't a promise of perfection, it was a promise of presence. And that was enough in the rhythm of these days. In the soft rise and fall of her breath, in the tiny glances and gestures, I understood the ultimate truth of parenthood. It isn't our plans, our expectations, or our fantasies that define us. It's the courage to face life fully, with love and presence, embracing our children exactly as they are. And in that embrace, we discover a love that transforms, shapes, and anchors us in ways we never imagined possible.